Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take a fascinating topic, a stack of compelling sources, and really extract the core insights you need to know.
Exactly. No endless searching needed. We've done the legwork for you.
Today we're diving into something truly fundamental, behavior.
And we've looked at research from all over, really. Biology, psychology, sociology, ethology, even AI, actually.
Yeah, the whole spectrum, from, the nitty-gritty biology of why we do things up to these big social patterns.
And our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to give you a clear, engaging handle on what drives behavior and why it's, well, so important in our lives and the world.
Without drowning you in jargon.
Wow.
So let's jump right in. What is behavior exactly? Seems simple, but is it?
That's the perfect place to start because defining it's actually more complex than you might think. It really depends on the lens you're using.
How so?
Well, in human psychology, for instance, it's often about how we respond mentally, physically, socially to things around us, inside and out.
Okay, like thoughts, actions, feelings.
Exactly. But if you're looking at, say, a non-human animal, the definition might be broader. Maybe just any observable activity or how it interacts with its environment or other animals.
Right. Okay, let's unpack that a bit. So biological psychology, they're looking at the physical stuff. Brains, genes, hormones.
Precisely. They're focused on the machinery, the immediate biological causes behind the actions.
Got it. And then you mentioned behaviorism. That sounds different.
Very different historically. They focused almost entirely on what you can see and measure. Observable actions, learning through rewards and punishment, associations.
Ah, the classic stimulus response. Less about what's going on inside the head.
Right. Less emphasis on those internal mental states, definitely.
And sociology then zooms out, looks at the bigger picture.
Yeah, sociology puts behavior firmly in the context of social structures, cultural norms, group dynamics, how we act because of our place in society, essentially.
So individuals within the social fabric.
Exactly. Then there's ethology, that's the study of animal behavior, but specifically in their natural environments.
Right, like Jane Goodall with the chimps.
Sort of, yeah. Ethologists are really interested in the function of a behavior. How does it help the animal survive, reproduce, what triggers it, how does it develop, and crucially, its evolutionary history.
Okay. And you also mentioned fields like sociobiology and evolutionary psychology.
They apply those evolutionary principles specifically to social behavior, thinking about why we cooperate or how we choose mates from the perspective of maximizing gene survival over generations.
Makes sense. And now AI is getting in on the act. How does that fit?
Well, AI mostly approaches behavior as a pattern recognition problem. It looks at huge data sets and tries to model and predict actions based on those patterns.
So it can spot correlations, maybe predict what someone might do next.
Yes, it's powerful for that. But, and this is a key point from our sources, it currently lacks that deeper understanding. It doesn't grasp the motivations, the emotions, the subjective experience behind the behavior.
It knows the what, maybe, but not really the why.
Exactly. It's pattern matching, not deep comprehension. Yet, anyway.
Okay, so lots of different angles. But despite all these perspectives, one thing that really jumps out from the research is universality.
Yes, it's quite remarkable. Certain behavioral patterns and tendencies seem to pop up again and again across time, across cultures, even across species, and through our own development.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, anthropologists talk about human universals, things found in practically every society ever studied, like language with grammar, making tools, telling stories or myths, having a sense of right and wrong.
Morality, yeah.
Social norms, family structures, recognizing basic emotions and facial expressions, cooperating, playing, even, interestingly, a tendency to favor our own group, ethnocentrism.
Wow. So those things are just fundamentally human.
It strongly suggests that, yeah. And related to this is an idea from cross-cultural psychology called psychic unity.
Psychic unity sounds intriguing.
It basically suggests we all share the same fundamental psychological toolkit, basic ways of thinking and feeling. But culture shapes how we use that toolkit, how those underlying capacities get expressed.
So the need to communicate might be universal.
Right. But how you communicate directly, indirectly, with lots of gestures, few gestures that's shaped by your culture. The core capacity is shared, the expression varies.
And it's not just culture, right? Our behavior changes as we grow up, too.
Absolutely. It's a dynamic process across our lifespan. Different stages, different priorities, different typical behaviors.
And if we look beyond humans to other animals.
Comparative psychology and ethology show us that many basic principles are shared. Things like learning, responding to stimuli, social interactions, communication. They exist in many species.
But we have to be careful not to just assume they think and feel exactly like us.
Exactly. That's the danger of anthropomorphism. We need solid evidence before attributing human-like internal states. A dog looking guilty might just be responding to your tone, not feeling complex remorse.
Right, right. But it still points to some deep evolutionary roots for certain behaviors.
Definitely. And this really brings us back to that old nature versus nurture debate, which, as our sources strongly suggest, is kind of outdated now.
It's not either.
Not at all. It's a constant dynamic interplay. Our evolved human nature, those universal tendencies, interacts constantly with our specific cultural and environmental context. That interaction shapes how our behavior actually, plays out.
It's always both, working together.
Always. Which leads nicely into the fact that behavior doesn't just happen. It's driven by this incredibly complex mix of factors, some inside us, some outside.
Okay, so internal biological and psychological stuff interacting with external environmental and social stuff.
Precisely. Let's dig into the biological and genetic side first. How does that shape what we do?
Where do we start? Evolution.
That's the bedrock, really. Natural selection. Behaviors that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce were more likely to get passed down genetically. It's the ultimate why for many behavioral predispositions.
Makes sense. And what about instincts? Is that still a useful concept?
Well, the old idea of fixed, rigid instincts versus learned behavior is too simplistic. It's all interactive. Even seemingly instinctive actions can be shaped by experience.
So how do scientists think about it now?
It's often reframed as evolved psychological adaptations. Basically, specialized mental modules that evolved to solve specific, recurring problems our ancestors faced, like maybe a predisposition to quickly learn to fear snakes or spiders.
Ah, okay. And genes themselves, how much influence do they have?
They definitely play a role. Genetics influences personality traits, cognitive abilities, even susceptibility to certain mental health conditions. But, and this is crucial, heritability. Estimates apply to populations, not individuals. Meaning having a gene linked to, say, risk-taking doesn't automatically make you a risk-taker. It just means genetic variation contributes to the variation in risk-taking we see across a population. It's not deterministic for any one person.
That's a really important clarification. Genes aren't destiny.
Not at all. And when we talk about the immediate biological basis, we're looking at neurobiology, brain structures.
Like the amygdala for fear or the prefrontal cortex for planning.
Exactly. And neurotransmitters, the brain's chemical messengers, like serotonin or dopamine, plus hormones like testosterone or cortisol circulating in our bodies. They all directly influence how we feel and act in the moment.
It's the brain's operating system, in a way.
You can think of it like that. And then sociobiology and evolutionary psychology zoom in on how evolution shapes our social behavior specifically.
Like cooperation, altruism, choosing partners.
Right. Concepts like kin selection, favoring relatives who share our genes, or reciprocal altruism, helping others expecting help, later fit in here. It's about the evolutionary logic behind social strategies.
And ethology, which we mentioned earlier, gives us that framework for observing behavior in the wild. Tinbergen's questions.
Yes. Tinbergen's 4 questions are incredibly useful. For any behavior, you can ask, what's the immediate cause? Causation. How does it develop in the individual development? What's its survival reproduction value, function? And how did it evolve over time, evolution?
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about birdsong. Causation might be hormones, day length, hearing another bird sing. Development is learning the song from adults. Function could be attracting mates or defending territory. Evolution is looking at how song differs across related species and why.
Okay, that really breaks it down. A very structured way to look at any behavior. So that covers the biological side. What about the environment and learning?
This is where behaviorism really shone a light. The idea that experience shapes us through learning. Classical conditioning.
Pavlov's dogs. Bell means food.
Exactly. Associating stimuli. And operant conditioning.
Learning from consequences. Rewards and punishments.
Right. Skinner boxes, learning that pressing a lever gets you food or avoids a shock. These are powerful learning mechanisms.
But it's not just simple learning, is it? The gene-environment thing sounds more complicated.
Much more complicated. Gene-environment interaction, or GXE, is key. It means the impact of your genes can depend on your environment, and vice versa.
How does that work?
The classic example is PKU, phenylketonuria. It's a genetic disorder, but it only causes severe problems if the person eats foods with phenylalanine. The gene's effect depends entirely on diet and environment.
Wow. So the gene itself isn't the whole story?
Not at all. Another example is the MAOA gene in aggression. Some variants are linked to higher aggression, but often only if the person also experienced childhood maltreatment. It's the combination of the gene and the environmental stressor.
So it's nature interacting with nurture. One modifies the effect of the other.
Precisely. And related to this is the idea of a range of reaction. Genes might set the potential range for a trait, like height or maybe even IQ points, but the environment determines where within that range you actually end up.
Interesting. And you mentioned epigenetics, too.
Yeah, that adds another layer. Epigenetics is about how environmental factors can actually change how your genes are expressed, switched on or off, without changing the DNA sequence itself. Things like stress or diet can leave epigenetic marks.
So our experiences can literally change how our genes function.
In a way, yes. It affects their activity. And then there's gene-environment correlation, RGE. This one's really fascinating.
Correlation, how's that different from interaction?
Interaction, GXE, is how genes and environment combine to affect you. Correlation, RGE, is about how your genes can actually influence the environments you experience in the first place.
Wait, how does that happen?
3 ways. Passive, you inherit genes and environment from parents. Musical parents might pass on musical genes and fill the house with music.
Okay, makes sense.
Evocative, your genetic traits elicit responses from others. A naturally cheerful baby might get more smiles and positive attention.
Ah, okay. And active.
Active is when you seek out environments that suit your genetic predispositions. An extroverted person actively joins clubs and goes to parties.
So our genes sort of nudge us towards certain experiences, which then shape us further.
Exactly. It's a feedback loop. It makes separating pure nature from pure nurture incredibly difficult because they're often intertwined from the start.
Wow, okay. That really complicates the picture. And beyond the physical environment, what about the social world? Norms.
Hugely important. Social norms. Those unwritten rules about what's acceptable in a group or society are powerful environmental forces. We learn them, we feel pressure to conform, there are consequences if we don't. They shape so much of our daily behavior.
Okay, so we've got biology, genes, environment, learning, and these complex interactions. What about what's going on inside our heads, the psychological dimension?
Right. This is about the internal mental processes that bridge the gap between biology, environment, and action. We're talking cognition, emotion, motivation, personality.
Cognition being thinking.
Basically, yeah. How we perceive the world, pay attention, remember things, learn, reason, make judgments, make decisions. It's our mental toolkit for processing information.
And emotion, more than just feeling.
Definitely. Emotions involve feelings, yes, but also physiological changes like heart rate and often behavioral expressions like facial expressions. And they're powerful motivators. Fear drives escape. Anger can drive confrontation.
And we don't just have emotions, we manage them, right? Emotion regulation.
Critically important. We use strategies, consciously or not, to influence which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we experience and express them. Things like rethinking a situation reappraisal or distracting ourselves.
And being good at that is important for, well, everything.
Pretty much. Good emotion regulation is linked to better mental health, better relationships, better decision-making. Problems with it can contribute to all sorts of difficulties.
Makes sense. What else falls under the psychological umbrella?
Well, there's our general state of mind, our psyche. Some perspectives, like psychoanalysis, emphasize unconscious drives and conflicts influencing our behavior without us even realizing it.
The hidden depths.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And then personality, those relatively stable patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that make us individuals. Traits like extroversion, conscientiousness. And as we noted, these have a heritable component.
But our thinking isn't always perfectly rational, is it? Cognitive biases?
Ah, yes. These are systematic ways our thinking deviates from pure logic or rationality. They're like mental shortcuts, heuristics, that are often useful but can lead us astray.
Like what? What are some common ones?
Oh, there are many. Confirmation bias, we seek out info that confirms what we already believe and ignore stuff that contradicts it.
Guilty.
We all are. Anchoring bias, relying too heavily on the first piece of information we get. Optimism bias, thinking good things are more likely to happen to us than bad things.
Oh.
And hyperbolic discounting, we strongly prefer smaller, immediate rewards over larger, delayed ones. Like choosing pizza now over saving for a bigger goal later.
Ooh. Yeah, that sounds familiar. And these biases really affect our choices.
Significantly. In everything from financial decisions to health choices to political opinions, they're Powerful, often unconscious influences.
So our internal psychology, thoughts, feelings, biases, personality acts like a filter, shaping how we respond to everything else.
That's a good way to put it. It mediates between our biology and the external world. But we can't forget the power of that external world, especially the social and cultural context.
Right. We're not just minds and vats. We live in societies.
Exactly. And those social norms we talked about, they're not just abstract ideas. They guide our everyday interactions, maintain order, violate them. And they're usually social consequences, formal or informal.
Peer pressure, laws, just getting weird looks.
All of it. And sometimes behavior happens at a group level. Collective behavior. Think crowds, fads, riots, social movements.
Things that emerge when people get together.
Yes. And social movements, in particular, can be incredibly powerful forces for changing society, challenging norms, shifting power structures.
And history itself is shaped by these behaviors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. History is largely the story of human actions, collective movements, wars, innovations, migrations. And then those historical events turn around and shape the values and behaviors of the next generation. It's a constant feedback loop.
Wow. And belief systems play a role too. Religion, ideology.
Definitely. They provide frameworks for understanding the world, defining what's important, what's right and wrong, how we should behave. They can foster incredible cohesion within a group.
But also conflict with other groups.
That's often the downside, yes. Strong in-group identity can sometimes lead to out-group prejudice.
So just like we have internal ways of regulating ourselves, societies have these external structures, norms, laws, beliefs that shape our behavior too.
Exactly. It's this constant dance between the internal and the external. Now, thinking about why we behave the way we do, what's the function of it all? Behavior isn't random. It serves purposes.
Survival, reproduction, basic stuff.
Yes, but also enabling us to live together, to cooperate, to interact effectively with each other and our environment. Cooperation, empathy, pro-social behavior. These are fascinating from that perspective.
Cooperation seems key for humans, but why do we do it? Especially altruism, helping others at a cost to ourselves. That seems like an evolutionary puzzle.
It does. But evolution offers explanations. Kin selection, helping relatives, helps copies of our own genes. Reciprocal altruism, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, can benefit everyone long term.
Yeah.
And maybe even group selection groups that cooperated better might have outcompeted other groups.
So cooperation can actually be an advantage.
Yes, especially in environments where cooperation pays off. And empathy, our ability to feel with others, seems crucial here. It might have evolved from basic parental care instincts and then broadened out.
Feeling what someone else feels motivates us to help.
Often, yes. And showing compassion can signal that you're a good person to cooperate with. These pro-social actions are like the glue holding societies together, enabling collective projects, building trust.
And lots of ethical systems reinforce these ideas, don't they?
They do. But human cooperation is, well, it's on another level compared to most animals, isn't it? The scale, the complexity.
Yeah, we build cities, run global economies. Bees cooperate, but not quite like that.
Right. And the thinking is that our capacity for cultural language, social learning, developing complex norms and moral systems, building institutions, has massively amplified our biological potential for cooperation. It's likely a case of gene-culture coevolution.
Our biology gave us a starting point, and our culture built on it exponentially.
Something like that, yeah. Now, let's shift focus slightly. What about our behavior towards the natural world? Environmental stewardship.
Ah, right. How we interact with the planet. Stewardship implies taking care of it.
Exactly. Responsible action conservation, reducing pollution, sustainable resource use. But currently, many of our behaviors are doing the opposite, aren't they?
Yeah. Industry, agriculture, consumption patterns leading to climate change, biodiversity loss.
Deforestation, water scarcity.
Yeah.
The list is long. So fostering more ecologically responsible behavior is critical for our long-term survival and, well, living in harmony with nature.
But that seems hard. Why is it so difficult to get people to act environmentally?
A key challenge is the mismatch between costs and benefits. The benefits of environmental action are often long-term, spread out among many people, maybe even future generations. The costs or inconveniences can feel immediate and personal.
The classic tragedy of the commons. My small contribution to pollution doesn't seem like much, but everyone thinking that way leads to disaster.
Precisely. So overcoming that requires finding ways to align individual incentives with collective well-being. Maybe strong ethical frameworks about our duty to nature, strong social norms favoring sustainability, or economic incentives that make the green choice the easy or profitable choice.
Tricky stuff. And zooming back out to society, Our behavior literally builds it, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, how we interact day to day creates social roles, hierarchies, institutions, power dynamics. The whole structure emerges from patterns of behavior.
And history, as we said, is driven by actions.
Revolutions, wars, innovations, it's all behavior. So sometimes individuals have a huge impact, especially in unstable times. But usually big historical shifts come from collective action. And then history shapes us back.
So behavior shapes society and society and history shape behavior.
It's a continuous loop. Now, what about when behavior goes wrong? When it's inappropriate or harmful?
Defining that seems tricky in itself. What's inappropriate depends on the context, right?
Absolutely. It's highly dependent on culture, time period, specific situation. But generally, we're talking about behavior that violates important social norms or causes harm to the self, to others, to society, or the environment.
Okay, so antisocial behavior, violence, theft, lying clearly fits. The harm principle is relevant here.
Yes. Does the behavior cause significant harm? But again, judgments about appropriateness are often socially constructed.
So what causes this kind of detrimental behavior? It must be complex, too.
Extremely. Psychologically, things like aggression have multiple influences. Innate tendencies, genetics like that MAOA gene we mentioned, brain function, especially the amygdala, and prefrontal cortex hormones like testosterone, neurotransmitters like serotonin.
Wow, a lot going on biologically.
Plus, negative emotions, poor emotion regulation skills, substance use. And research suggests physical aggression can show up early and be relatively stable. Antisocial behavior, more broadly rule-breaking, plus aggression also has genetic links, but interacts heavily with the environment, like peer group norms.
And just bad decisions.
Yeah, poor decision-making fueled by cognitive biases or a lack of empathy can definitely contribute to harmful actions.
And social factors, it's not all in the individual's head.
Definitely not. Economic inequality, for instance, shows links to higher crime rates.
Yeah.
Maybe through relative deprivation, feeling unfairly disadvantaged compared to others. Broader social inequalities matter too.
And peer pressure, social learning.
Huge influences.
Yeah.
Peer groups can encourage or discourage bad behavior. And we can learn harmful behaviors just by observing others, especially if those behaviors seem rewarded or go unpunished. And think about political polarization today, how it can breed hostility, erode trust.
Yeah, that feels very relevant. And environmental factors, like actual physical environment.
Yes. Resource scarcity, competition for land, water, especially when made worse by climate change or poor management, can fuel unrest and conflict, particularly where governance is weak.
And early life experiences.
Crucial. Adversity like poverty, neglect, abuse increases the risk for later antisocial behavior, often interacting with genetic vulnerabilities. There's also a distinction sometimes made between overt aggression and covert stuff like stealing or lying. They might have different roots.
But the link between environmental stress and conflict isn't automatic, is it?
No, it's heavily mediated by social and political context. Good governance, fair resource distribution, economic opportunities, social cohesion. These can all mitigate the risk. Things like resource capture by elites or ecological marginalization, pushing people into bad situations, make conflict more likely.
Okay, so a whole web of psychological, social, and environmental factors contributing to harmful behavior. And the consequences, they ripple outwards, don't they?
Massively. For individuals.
Yeah.
Injury, trauma, mental health problems, legal trouble, broken relationships, exclusion. The list goes on.
And for society.
Eroded trust, fear, economic costs for healthcare and policing, social unrest, political conflict, destabilized governments, hindered development. Extreme polarization can even undermine democracy itself.
And ecologically.
Ecosystem damage, resource depletion, biodiversity loss, pollution, climate change, undermining the very systems that support us long term. The consequences are profound at every level.
Okay. Given all this complexity, how on earth do scientists even study behavior systematically? What are the methods?
It's a diverse toolkit. Traditional approaches include ethology's natural observation, watching animals in the wild, using ethograms to catalog behaviors, maybe field experiments. Rigor in the real world is key there.
And in the lab?
Experimental psychology uses controlled lab settings. Manipulate one variable, measure the effect on behavior, essential for establishing cause and effect. Think behaviorism, cognitive psychology, comparative psychology studies.
And sociology. How do they study groups?
A mix of quantitative methods surveys, analyzing large data sets, mapping social networks, and qualitative methods interviews, focus groups, participant observation, ethnography, really getting deep into social structures and cultural contexts.
So observation, experiments, surveys. What about modeling? Trying to simulate behavior.
Yes, that's increasingly important. Game theory analyzes strategic choices in situations of conflict or cooperation. Think prisoner's dilemma. Evolutionary game theory looks at how strategies evolve over time.
But people aren't always rational game players, are they?
That's a limitation. Though newer models try to account for bounded rationality and uncertainty, then there's complex systems analysis.
How is that different?
It views behavior as emerging from the interactions of many parts. It looks at collective dynamics, self-organization, feedback loops, tipping points. Useful for understanding things like flocking birds or ant colonies or even human social dynamics.
And agent-based modeling, ABM.
ABM simulates behavior from the bottom up. You program individual agents with simple rules, put them together, and see what large-scale patterns emerge, like segregation, norm formation, opinion dynamics.
Sounds powerful, but hard to check against reality.
Validation is a challenge, definitely. Managing complexity, analyzing the output. But they're increasingly trying to ground ABMs in real data.
And now AI brings new tools to the table.
Right. Machine learning applied to huge data sets, social media, sensors, video, to find patterns and make predictions, identifying subtle correlations we might miss.
So what are the pros and cons there?
Potential to reveal hidden patterns, inform other models. But limitations are significant. Correlation isn't causation. Models can inherit biases from the data. It's pattern recognition, not deep understanding, and major ethical concerns about transparency, fairness, privacy.
And when we try to compare behavior across different species, that must be tricky.
Very. Anthropocentrism is a big risk, projecting human thoughts onto animals. We need a biocentric view, understanding them on their own terms.
And similar behavior doesn't mean the same underlying process.
Exactly. Equivalence versus similarity. Brains differ, evolutionary paths differ. We can't assume a bat experiences the world like a dolphin, even if both use echolocation. Cognitive skills are tailored to ecological niches, not some single ladder of intelligence.
And just designing fair tests is hard.
Incredibly. How do you make a task truly comparable for species with different senses, motivations, physical abilities? There's always that tension between ecological validity, real-world relevance, and experimental control.
So it seems like all methods have trade-offs. Field studies are realistic but messy. Lab studies are controlled but artificial.
Precisely. Modeling and simulation try to bridge that gap, but they rely on simplifying assumptions. And these newer computational methods, game theory, ABM, AI, represent a shift. They let us study emergence and complexity at new scales.
But raise new issues about interpretability, validation, bias.
Exactly. It's a constantly evolving landscape of methodologies.
Okay, shifting gears again. Behavior isn't just science. It's deeply ethical, too. Questions of responsibility, right and wrong.
Absolutely. And this brings us head-to-head with huge philosophical questions, like free will versus determinism.
The age-old question. Do we choose freely, or are our actions predetermined?
Right. Causal determinism suggests every event is necessitated by prior events and conditions, plus the laws of nature. If that's true, where does free will fit? And if there's no free will, what happens to moral responsibility?
Can you blame someone if they couldn't have done otherwise?
That's the crux of it. Compatibilists try to argue free will and determinism can coexist. Maybe freedom just means acting without coercion. Incompatibilists say no. Libertarians believe we do have free will that breaks the causal chain. Hard determinists say free will is an illusion.
And where you stand on that changes everything about morality, justice.
It potentially does. If behavior is determined, maybe the focus shifts from blame and retribution towards understanding causes, prevention, rehabilitation.
And we also have different ethical frameworks for judging behavior, right? Like deontology and utilitarianism.
Yes, two major ones. Deontology focuses on duties, rules, rights. The act itself is right or wrong, regardless of consequences. Think, thou shalt not kill. It's often patient-centered in medicine respecting autonomy.
But it can be rigid. What if duties conflict?
That's a common criticism. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, is consequentialist. What matters is the outcome maximizing overall happiness or well-being, the greatest good for the greatest number.
So the ends can justify the means.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It's often society-centered, like in public health decisions, aiming for the best outcome for the population. But it's hard to predict all consequences. It might sacrifice individuals for the group, and how do you even measure happiness?
So different ways to decide what's right.
And sometimes they clash dramatically. There are other frameworks, too. Rights-based ethics, virtue ethics, focusing on character.
And defining proper behavior in real life isn't just philosophy, is it? It's cultural, contextual.
Hugely. Standards change over time, across cultures. What's proper is socially constructed. And that tension between duties, rights, deontology, and overall outcomes, utilitarianism, plays out constantly in real-world dilemmas.
Is there any universal agreement on morality?
Well, the existence of moral codes everywhere suggests some underlying universal concerns, maybe around cooperation, fairness, harm. But the specifics vary wildly.
And when we study behavior, ethics is paramount there too, especially with human subjects.
Absolutely. The Belmont Report principles are foundational. Respect for persons, autonomy, consent, protecting the vulnerable, privacy, beneficence, do good, minimize harm, and justice, fair selection of participants, avoid exploitation. IRBs oversee this.
Institutional review boards, right. And for animals.
Similar principles, often summarized by the 3 Rs. Replacement, use non-animal methods if possible. Reduction, use the minimum number of animals. And refinement, minimize any pain or distress, better housing procedures. Ethical committees oversee this too.
And that free will debate circles back to things like the justice system.
Yes, if we lean deterministic, maybe the focus shifts from punishment as retribution towards prevention, treatment, managing risk. It's a live debate.
And the deontology versus utilitarianism clash that happens in policy all the time.
Constantly. Vaccine mandates, resource allocation in disasters, AI safety rules often requires balancing individual rights against the collective good, trying to integrate both perspectives.
Okay, so understanding behavior is complex, studying it is complex, judging it ethically is complex. How can we actually try to improve behavior, guide it towards better outcomes?
Great question. We can think about interventions at the individual level, the societal level, and even for AI.
Okay, individuals first. We talked about cognitive biases. Can we overcome them?
We can mitigate them. Awareness is the first step, just knowing biases exist. Then actively seeking diverse opinions, questioning initial assumptions or anchors, using data to check gut feelings, reframing choices to avoid loss aversion.
So conscious effort and critical thinking.
Yes. And sometimes designing things to help, like pre-commitment devices, or making the beneficial choice the easy default.
And what about managing emotions better?
Enhancing emotional regulation is key. Therapies like CBT, DBT, ACT provide tools. Understanding your emotions, learning to reappraise situations, mindfulness, acceptance, distress tolerance skills, healthy expression, problem solving.
And that helps reduce negative behaviors.
Definitely. And improves mental health overall. Plus, actively developing empathy and perspective-taking skills can foster pro-social behavior and reduce prejudice. Things like education, intergroup contact, certain types of meditation can help here.
Okay, so tools for individuals. What about changing things at the societal level?
We could use environmental design nudging or choice architecture, guiding choices gently without forcing them.
Like how?
Making organ donation opt-out instead of opt-in, placing healthy food at eye level, simplifying information, providing timely feedback, highlighting positive social norms. Most people in your area recycle.
Clever. Effective.
Often, yes, and low cost.
Right.
But ethical concerns exist. Is it manipulative? Is it transparent? We also need to actively strengthen pro-social norms, valuing cooperation, fairness, compassion.
How do you strengthen a norm?
Education, public campaigns, leaders modeling the behavior, community initiatives, celebrating positive examples. It's slow and challenging, but important.
And tackling inequality.
Crucial. Promoting social equity, reducing poverty, expanding opportunity, ensuring fair treatment. Strong safety nets can address some root causes of detrimental behavior like crime or unrest.
Education and awareness seem foundational too.
Absolutely. Helping people understand consequences, grasp complex issues. It empowers better choices. And finally, effective governance.
Good institutions.
Yes, fair laws, reliable conflict resolution, accountability, trust in institutions, they're essential for social order and cooperation.
Okay, and now, AI behavior. How do we make sure AI acts ethically?
This is the huge challenge of value alignment. How do we ensure AI goals match complex human values, especially in new situations?
What are the key principles people talk about?
Common themes include beneficence, do good. Non-maleficence, don't harm. Fairness, transparency, can we understand why I did that? Accountability, who's responsible. Privacy, robustness, and safety.
How do we achieve that?
It requires technical research, how to specify values, build robust systems, detect bias, and governance regulations, standards, auditing, public discussion. Plus, international cooperation, because AI doesn't respect borders.
It seems like just knowing the right thing isn't enough for people or AI. There's a gap between knowing and doing.
Exactly. That's why nudging and social norms can be powerful. They work with our biases or social tendencies, often more effectively than just appealing to reason or willpower.
making the good choice the easy or socially approved choice.
Right. And there's an interesting parallel between aligning AI with human values and aligning individual behavior with collective good. AI learning values might echo how humans are socialized.
So ensuring good AI behavior needs tech solutions and deep thinking about what good behavior even means and how we promote it in ourselves.
I think that's exactly right. It requires both technical skill and profound ethical reflection.
Wow, okay. So wrapping up, behavior is just central to everything, driven by this incredible mix of internal and external forces.
It really is. And the big takeaway, I think, is that understanding it, even trying to understand it, requires drawing from so many different fields. But that understanding is crucial for navigating our own lives, tackling societal problems, and figuring out our place on this planet.
Couldn't agree more. And for you, our listener, here's a final thought to chew on. Think about one behavior maybe your own, maybe something you see in society that looks different to you now after considering all these drivers we've discussed. What new questions pop into your head?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of behavior.
Until next time, thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
This is DigitView.